The rain fell as if the sky itself were crying with her. Elena Moreau stood on the sidewalk, shivering. The wind tore the umbrella from her hands. Eric's words still echoed in her mind, cold, sharp, final. He had left her there, in the middle of the storm, as if years of love had meant nothing. And somewhere between the thunder and the distant hum of cars, a silence was born, one that would change her life forever. The wet asphalt reflected the city's red lights, and every step Elena took felt like an act of defiance. Her dress clung to her soaked body, her face a blur of tears and rain. Her phone died as she tried to call for a ride, and a wave of loneliness pressed down on her chest. She felt small, invisible, lost, until a headlight flashed through the rain, and a black car pulled up beside her. Without thinking, she opened the door. The inside was warm, the windows fogged, the air heavy. It felt like a refuge, a brief moment of relief in the middle of chaos. But the silence inside was strange, dense, almost threatening. Elena took a deep breath, not realizing this wasn't the car she had ordered. Then a sound broke through the silence, a faint, muffled groan coming from the back seat. Her heart pounded. A man was there, slumped against the seat, his face streaked with blood and his eyes half open. For a moment, she thought of running, but something in his expression stopped her. It wasn't just pain, it was power. His name was Dante Romano. Even wounded, there was something commanding about his presence, a kind of strength that didn't need to ask for permission. Fear and curiosity tangled inside her. It was just past midnight, and fate was quietly turning the gears that would tie their lives together forever. She tried to speak, but Dante only lifted a hand, signaling her to stay quiet. There was something in that gesture that made her obey without knowing why. The rain tapping against the windows became a dark melody, and Elena realized the stranger beside her carried real danger and something else she couldn't name. The car began to move slowly, though no driver was visible. Elena soon noticed a man behind the wheel, a bodyguard. Her fate was no longer in her own hands. Each passing mile pulled her farther from the woman who once waited to be saved, and closer to a story that would change her forever. When the car passed through the tunnel, the city disappeared behind the blurred lights. Elena looked at the injured man beside her and felt that whatever was coming next was bigger than fear itself. The night wasn't over, it had only just begun, and somewhere between pain and mystery, a new version of her was being born. The car stopped before a tall iron gate surrounded by shadows. The courtyard lights flickered on, revealing a mansion wrapped in secrets. Elena stepped out with trembling hands, her heart racing, the rain softening as if the world itself were holding its breath. Two men opened the doors, silent, expressionless. The air around her didn't speak of comfort, it spoke of power. Dante was carried inside, supported by one of the guards. Even wounded, his eyes stayed sharp, cold, commanding every space around him. Elena tried to speak, but he simply raised a hand, asking for silence. The marble walls reflected the warm glow of the lamps, and every step she took echoed like a mistake that could no longer be undone. Something deep inside told her there was no way back. In the main hall, she noticed hidden cameras, glass cases filled with weapons, and portraits of powerful men. The scent of blood mixed with expensive cologne revealed the contrast between luxury and danger. Dante sat down, breathing heavily, while she rushed to a first aid tray on the table. Her hands moved on their own, the instincts of a nurse still guided her. As she cleaned the wound, she saw the mark of a bullet near his shoulder. Dante didn't groan. He only watched her closely, studying every reaction. "You work at St. Mary's Hospital," he said, his voice rough and low. Elena froze. He knew who she was, her name, her job, even her usual shift. A chill ran down her spine. She didn't ask how he knew. She simply understood that the man in front of her saw everything and controlled everything. Dante tilted his head and even weakened. There was authority in every move. Elena felt fear, but also something she couldn't explain, a pull that defied logic. Their breathing fell into rhythm, the air growing heavier by the second. Dante grabbed her wrist for a moment, and time seemed to stop. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered before closing his eyes for a brief second. Elena swallowed her fear and stayed silent. She knew that saying the wrong thing could cost her more than she could afford. The house felt alive, full of invisible lies. And without meaning to, she had stepped into the heart of something far bigger than herself. Hours passed, and the storm outside began to fade. Elena wandered through the room, taking in every detail: the old photographs, the books written in languages she didn't recognize, the faint murmur of distant voices. It was as if the house itself carried stories no one dared to tell. That's when she finally understood. Dante Romano wasn't just a man. He was a living urban legend. When he opened his eyes again, his voice was steadier. From now on, you stay with me. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Elena realized her life had changed forever, and the fear inside her was slowly mixing with something new, dangerous, and impossible to control. Something that, little by little, began to feel like desire. Morning came slowly, sunlight slipping through the mansion's curtains. Elena woke with the weight of the unknown pressing on her chest. Her clothes had been replaced by a soft robe, and on the table sat a tray with coffee and medicine. Dante was seated across from her, already dressed in a suit, his wound covered, his gaze steady. There was something different about him now. He looked ready to shatter whatever truth she thought she knew. "Your husband has debts," he said, his tone cold and cutting through the silence. Elena frowned, trying to process the words. "Gambling debts. Big ones. With people you'd never want to meet." Each word fell like a blade, one after another. She shook her head, struggling to breathe, but deep down, she already knew. Eric had lied before. Why wouldn't he lie again? Dante walked over to a folder on the table and tossed a stack of documents in front of her. Photos, bank transfers, numbers that didn't lie. But what made Elena lose her breath weren't the debts, it was the medical reports. Hospital reports. Her reports. He sold confidential pediatric patient information to pay off his gambling debts. Dante's voice echoed through her like thunder. The floor seemed to vanish beneath her feet. Images flashed in her mind: the children, the trusting parents, the smiling faces she had sworn to protect, all betrayed by the man who had shared her bed. Elena stumbled back, pressing against the wall, her hands covering her face. Her heart pounded wildly, as if trying to escape the pain tearing through her chest. Dante approached slowly, his gaze steady on her trembling shoulders. "You needed to know. He used you, and now, they're coming for you." His tone was less cold this time, but still merciless. Elena looked up, breathless. The realization hit her: the danger surrounding Dante was now her own. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a living witness. A mix of disgust and disbelief consumed her. Every memory of Eric felt tainted: the kisses, the touches, the promises, all lies. Dante noticed the despair in her eyes and looked away for a moment, as if he understood the pain of betrayal. Between them, a silence grew heavy, wordless, the kind that only exists between people marked by invisible scars. Elena walked to the window. Outside, guards paced the courtyard, circling the high walls. She realized she was trapped, yet, somehow, also protected. Her instincts told her to run, but her heart, lost in confusion, began to see something in Dante that fear couldn't erase. Something too strange to be coincidence. When she turned back, Dante was gone. Only the open folder remained on the table, its pages fluttering with the wind from the curtains. And amid the distant noise of the city, Elena felt her old life end right there, without warning, without goodbye. Yesterday's storm had washed away her past and left behind the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. She spent the night awake, pacing back and forth, the ticking clock dragging time along. Each beat reminded her of what she'd lost: love, trust, innocence. Eric's face flickered through her mind, now twisted by lies. The mansion was steeped in silence, and her heart pounded like a drum caught between fear and anger. When Dante walked into the room, she looked at him differently, not as the dangerous stranger from the night before, but as the man who held the truth. He still wore the bandage, the dark tailored suit, that same unyielding stare. "You can leave if you want," he said, crossing his arms. "But out there are people waiting to silence you." His tone was firm, but beneath it, there was something protective, something that felt dangerously close to care. Elena took a deep breath and answered only with her eyes. There was nowhere to go, no home, no husband, no future. All that remained was this man who seemed to see something in her that she couldn't see in herself. When Dante turned to leave, she called out to him. "I'll stay," she said softly, but with certainty. And in that moment, something invisible settled between them. In the days that followed, she cared for Iswound with the same tenderness she once gave to the children at the hospital. Trembling hands, gentle touch, focused eyes. Dante watched in silence, saying nothing, but the quiet between them carried a growing tension. Every movement became a wordless confession. Every breath, a fragile thread drawing them closer together. One night, he told her part of his story about loss, betrayal, and blood. Elena listened, and for the first time, she saw more than a criminal. She saw a man shaped by pain. Something in her recognized that emptiness. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. As days passed, fear gave way to trust. Dante began including her in conversations with his men, explaining codes, showing her how power worked. Elena didn't know why, but she learned quickly. Her eyes changed. She was no longer the woman lost in the storm. She was becoming someone who understood the darkness she now lived in. One evening, she found him on the balcony, looking out over the city. He offered her a glass of wine. Their silence was calm, almost conspiratorial. Elena realized that somehow, she felt safe there, not because she trusted Dante, but because, for the first time, she trusted herself. And that scared her as much as it thrilled her. When the city lights flickered for a moment, a chill ran through her body. It was a warning of what was coming. Elena didn't know it yet, but the woman she was becoming was about to be tested, and love, fear, and revenge were about to intertwine in ways that would change everything. The night was too quiet. The distant chirping of crickets blended with the soft crackle of the fireplace. Elena sat reading on the couch while Dante went through some papers at the nearby table. Then the lights flickered once, twice. His eyes lifted, sharp and alert. The sudden silence warned them before the first gunshot split the air. The window shattered. Guards rushed through the halls. Muffled shouts filled the mansion. Dante grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her down the side corridor. Her heart pounded, her breathing quickened, and the echo of gunfire mixed with the sound of their footsteps. Every step felt like a race against fate. It was the first time Elena had seen hell up close, and it had a human face. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. The walls shook under the impact of bullets, and the floor trembled beneath her bare feet. Dante pushed aside a bookcase, revealing a hidden door, and shoved Elena inside. It was a narrow, dark passage leading underground. The emergency lights flashed red, casting tense faces in and out of shadow. The war had finally reached them. Down below, the chaos above sounded distant, but the fear was real. Dante spoke in a steady tone, issuing orders through his radio. Elena watched him, unable to look away. Even surrounded by danger, he never lost control. There was something terrifyingly calm about that man, and for the first time, she understood why so many feared him and why she couldn't bring herself to run from him. The underground vault was more than just a shelter. It was a symbol of the Romano Empire: concrete, steel, and secrets. Elena leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. The faint sound of sirens above told her the battle was still raging outside. She looked at Dante and realized that somehow she was part of it now. No longer a bystander, she was part of the story. Time seemed suspended. Dante ran a blood-streaked hand through his hair and looked at her with an expression that mixed fury and tenderness. "You okay?" he asked, his voice firm but human. Elena nodded, not realizing she was shaking. Something had changed inside her. A quiet strength was being born right in the middle of her fear. The steel door shook with a deafening crash, and for a heartbeat, the world stopped. Dante raised his gun and stepped in front of her. Elena grabbed his arm, eyes brimming but steady. The woman who had once been left crying in the rain no longer existed. In the face of chaos, a new Elena rose, and this time, no one would leave her behind. When the gunfire finally stopped, the mansion was in ruins. Dante walked through the wreckage, Elena close behind him. The moonlight reflected off the blood-stained floors and the cold shine of metal weapons. She took a deep breath, her body trembling but her gaze unwavering. The storm that had once broken her had returned not from the sky, but from within. Dawn brought with it an eerie stillness. The mansion still smelled of smoke and gunpowder. Elena watched as the guards carried bodies from the garden while Dante, dressed in a dark suit, gave quiet orders, his eyes distant. Everything looked under control, but the calm was only the surface of something ready to collapse. Deep down, he knew this was far from over. By mid-afternoon, a phone call changed everything. The voice on the other end was cold and sharp. "We have your husband." Dante's hand clenched into a fist, his eyes hardening. When Elena heard Eric's name, the ground seemed to disappear beneath her. For an instant, past and present collided. The man who had betrayed her was now a bargaining chip in a war she barely understood. Viktor Petrov. The name hung heavy in the air. The same man Dante had once fought was now demanding Elena in exchange for Eric. "She comes to us, or he dies." The room went silent. Elena trembled, unsure if the tears burning her eyes were from anger or pity. Dante stared at her firm, unflinching, yet there was something in his eyes, a silent plea for her not to go. Elena paced across the room, the sound of her heels echoing against the cold marble. Eric's face flashed in her mind like a ghost, the false smile, the broken promises, the betrayal. Part of her wanted to save him, part of her wanted to forget him. But what kept her grounded was the memory of the children he'd betrayed. Love was gone, and in its place, only justice remained. Dante spread a map across the table, marking a red X in the center of the city. An old warehouse. That's where they're taking him. Elena watched him closely, and for the first time, she saw him hesitate. There was something different in his eyes, not the look of a protector, but of a man who knew he was about to lead her straight into hell. Night fell quickly. The city seemed to breathe slower. Dante prepared everything: men, weapons, escape routes. But Elena caught him off guard. "I'm coming with you." Her voice was steady, almost cold. Dante tried to stop her, but her gaze said otherwise. She was no longer the woman who needed saving. She was the one ready to face what was left of her past. Inside the car, the sound of the engine was the only noise. Dante drove in silence, eyes fixed on the rain-slick road. Elena watched the city lights sliding across the window, fleeting, like memories trying to escape. Their destination was the same, a place where love and hate would blur into one. The warehouse awaited, and with it, the final reckoning. When the car stopped in front of the rusted gate, Elena took a deep breath. The rain had started again, thin, relentless. Dante gripped the gun at his waist and looked at her for a moment. "Stay behind me," he said. But she didn't answer. Deep down, she knew this time, she wouldn't just be a witness. She would be the ending to the story that began in the rain. The warehouse loomed like a living shadow on the edge of the city. Rust dripped from the walls, and the wind carried the metallic scent of fear. Dante walked ahead, silent, his weapon steady in his hands. Elena followed, each step echoing like a verdict. The faint clinking of chains in the distance told them they weren't alone. Between the concrete pillars, Viktor Petrov emerged, tall, imposing, wearing the smile of a man who believed he had already won. Behind him, Eric, tied, beat, eyes wide with panic. Elena stopped. Her heart felt heavy, but her eyes were dry. There was too much to feel, and so she felt nothing at all, just emptiness. Viktor stepped forward, a cruel laugh slipping from his lips. "Interesting, isn't it? The man who sold you out now begs for your mercy." His words dripped like poison. Elena looked at Eric and didn't see her husband, only the betrayer. Dante's gaze never left Viktor, his finger poised on the trigger. The tension hung in the air like a taut wire ready to snap. Eric began to speak through tears. I didn't have a choice, Elena. They were going to kill us. But every word sounded like an echo of lies too many times repeated. She stepped closer, slowly, and knelt before him. Her eyes were calm, almost gentle but cold. You had a choice, she said softly. You just didn't choose the truth. Her voice cut through the air like a blade. Dante gave the signal. His men appeared from the shadows, unleashing fire. The sound of gunshots roared through the warehouse like thunder. Victor tried to fight back, but fate was faster. A single, precise shot from Dante dropped him instantly. Smoke, echoes, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air, painting the scene of an ending, the fall of one empire and the rise of another. When the silence returned, Elena was still standing in front of Eric. He was crying, begging for forgiveness. She simply looked at him with the eyes of someone who finally understood that love and hate can be born from the same place. His face was now the portrait of his own downfall. Without another word, she turned and walked toward Dante, never looking back. Dante placed a steady hand on her shoulder, saying nothing. His eyes spoke for him: respect, fear, and a strange kind of admiration. The woman who had stumbled into his life by accident now walked beside him with purpose and resolve. Elena Moreau had died there that night. In her place was born Elena Romano, forged in the fire of pain and vengeance. As they left the warehouse, the rain began to fall again, washing away the blood and the memories. The sound of the drops blended with the rumble of engines, carrying away what little remained of the past. Elena looked out the car window and realized that, for the first time, she felt no guilt. She felt power, and that cold, unfamiliar feeling would take her further than she ever imagined. The days that followed moved slowly, wrapped in a silence that seemed to press against the mansion walls. Dante spent long hours on the phone, rebuilding alliances, while Elena sat in the office, staring at Eric's papers spread across the table. Nothing about her resembled the helpless woman from the storm. There was calm in her every move, but it was the calm that comes before something inevitable. Eric was still alive, held somewhere Dante never mentioned, awaiting judgment under the rules of the underworld. But Elena didn't want justice served by others. She wanted closure, something personal, intimate, final. And her plan began to take shape in silence, crafted with the precision of someone who no longer hesitated. For weeks, she rebuilt her routine, returning to the hospital under a new identity, as if nothing had happened. The same halls, the same cold lights, the same familiar sounds. But inside her, everything had changed. What once was compassion had turned into purpose. Each step she took brought her closer to the ending she had chosen. On a gray morning, Elena entered the isolation ward where Eric was being kept under discreet protection. The man who had once made her believe in love now lay frail, connected to tubes and machines. He looked at her, startled, trying to form her name, but no sound came out. The silence between them said everything that words never could. With the precision of a professional, she adjusted the equipment, calm, controlled, deliberate. The floor was changed, the dosage altered. No words, no emotion, only the steady beeping of the heart monitor counting down his final moments. When Eric realized what was happening, it was already too late. Elena took his hand not in anger, but with the serenity of someone who finally understands the cost of truth. The monitor beeped once, then fell silent. His breathing faded like a candle snuffed out. Elena stood there for a while, watching, until the hum of the air conditioner filled the emptiness. Then she straightened her coat, turned, and walked out of the room without looking back. The past had been buried not in tears, but in justice. Back at the mansion, Dante was waiting for her. He didn't ask a single question, he just looked at her, as if recognizing the shadow in the eyes of someone who had crossed a line. Elena sat beside him in silence, and for a moment, they both understood this was the real beginning. The beginning of something built not only on pain, but on power and choice. That night, the sky was clear. Elena walked out onto the balcony and watched the moon reflecting over the newly rebuilt garden. Justice had been served, but the price had been high, and yet, for the first time, she felt peace. The woman who had once begged to be loved now controlled her own destiny, and that was a kind of love no one could ever take away. Time passed. The wounds healed, though they left deep marks, the kind that lived in silence. The mansion was restored, brighter than before, surrounded by gardens that once seemed impossible to exist there. Elena walked through the halls with calm assurance. Her footsteps no longer carried the sound of escape. They carried the sound of someone who owned her place in the world. Now, she carried another kind of life within her. Her hands rested gently on her belly, and the light in her eyes was different, stronger, filled with promise. Dante watched from a distance, proud and silent, understanding that true love doesn't come from perfection, but from survival. Their empire was growing, and so was their family. The Romano Foundation had become a symbol of hope. Children's hospitals, clinics, rehabilitation programs. The irony of fate. The same world Eric had corrupted, Elena was now rebuilding. Every new wing opened was an answer to the past. Every child healed was a scar turned into healing. Elena didn't seek applause. She simply did what had to be done. The power that once felt dangerous had become a tool for redemption. Dante, by her side, was the pillar that held everything together, a man hardened by war, softened by her love. Together, they had learned that sometimes one must walk through darkness to earn the light. The day Lucia was born, Luna cried again, not from pain, but from gratitude. Dante held their daughter as if the entire world fit within his arms. In that moment, the blood and violence felt distant. The room smelled of life, and the sound of the baby's cry echoed like a second chance. Months later came Marco. The boy had his mother's eyes and his father's temper. Elena smiled as she watched him play in the garden under the shade of the trees. Sometimes, Dante would join them, standing quietly, a rare calm on his face. They were simple moments, yet filled with meaning, the kind of peace that can't be bought, only earned. The press called her the woman who turned tragedy into power, but Elena never responded to the headlines. What mattered wasn't what the world said, it was what she saw when she looked at her family. Every gesture, every laugh, every new day was a victory, not over the world, but over the woman she once was. At dusk, Elena liked to walk alone through the garden. The soft wind brushed through her hair, and the distant noise of the city felt meaningless. Sometimes she thought back to the storm, to the night when everything began, and she smiled, because now she understood that rain hadn't destroyed her. It had simply cleared the path for her to be reborn. 2 years had passed. The sun rose over the Romano's new estate, lighting up vineyards that stretched as far as the eye could see. The sound of children's laughter echoed across the fields, blending with the song of birds. Elena watched Lucia and Marco running between the vines, and for a moment, everything felt exactly as it should. Peace. Dante, dressed in a suit with his hands in his pockets, approached quietly. He was no longer the man he once was. The eyes that had once burned with fury now reflected pride and calm. He sat beside Elena, and together they watched their children play, needing no words. Their love no longer shouted, it lived in small gestures, in glances that spoke volumes. The Romano Empire thrived. Hospitals, foundations, political alliances. Their name was both respected and feared. But inside their home, there was no power, only love. Elena had achieved the impossible, turning a life born from pain into a home filled with light. Every choice that once seemed cruel now made perfect sense. She still kept the necklace she wore the night of the storm. Sometimes she would touch it gently and remember who she was before everything changed. That naive, lost, hopeful woman. And she realized she no longer hated her, because without her, the Elena of today wouldn't exist. The pain had been the price, but also the key. Dante founded a school in honor of his mother, and Elena opened a neonatal care wing named after the brother she lost in childhood. Every project was more than philanthropy, it was healing. The past had left scars, but now each one told a different story, a story of rebuilding. The nights were peaceful. Dante would read in his study while Elena wrote letters she never sent, tucking them away in a box at the back of the closet. They were letters to her past, to her fears, to the woman who once waited for love and found redemption instead. Sometimes she reread them, just to remember how far she had come. The city saw them as a legendary couple, powerful, unshakable, yet human enough to inspire. Elena knew the world would always look for a story to tell about them. But what no one would ever understand was that, in the end, it all came down to one choice, the choice to stop being a victim and become the author of her own story. On the terrace, beneath the golden sky, Elena took Dante's hand and smiled. "Was it worth it?" he asked, his eyes never leaving hers. She nodded softly. "Every bit of it." And in that moment, with the sound of cicadas and the whisper of the wind around them, time itself seemed to bow. The future no longer frightened them. It was simply another chapter written by those who had learned how to begin again. The night breeze drifted gently through the open window, swaying the curtains. Elena walked to the glass and looked out at the moon reflecting on the lake. The same moon that had once witnessed her fall now illuminated her rebirth. Everything was quiet, yet inside her, there was a chorus of memories. Every pain, every tear, every choice. All of it had led her here. She remembered the night of the storm, the wet asphalt, the dress clinging to her skin, the sound of the car approaching. In that moment, she truly believed she was living the end. But what she didn't know was that fate sometimes disguises itself as tragedy to clear the path for transformation. The woman who once cried in the rain had died that night, and from her pain, a strength was born that no one could ever destroy. Elena ran her fingers across the window, tracing an invisible line. On the other side, she saw the reflection of a different woman. No longer the nurse who begged to be loved, but the woman who had learned to love without losing herself. There was power in calmness, and sweetness in strength. It was the perfect balance between light and shadow. Dante entered the room quietly. He stopped behind her, wrapped his arms around her, and rested his chin on her shoulder. Neither of them spoke. Their silence was the kind of love that doesn't need words, only presence. The war was over. What remained now was life. In the crib beside them, Lucia slept peacefully, while Marco mumbled in his dreams from the room next door. Elena looked at them, her heart swelling. It was for them that everything had made sense. The world could call her many things, cold, strong, unyielding, but to them, she would always be mother. She stepped out onto the balcony. The garden, bathed in moonlight, looked like another world. The flowers swayed with the breeze, and the distant hum of cicadas whispered that time never stops, it only reinvents itself. Elena closed her eyes and drew in a deep breath. It felt like breathing for the very first time. In that quiet moment, she understood there's no such thing as a happy ending, only a new beginning. And hers had started the night she was left in the rain. Because it was there, in the heart of chaos, that she discovered what love truly is. Not a shelter, but a daily choice between forgiveness and strength. Elena Romano smiled. Behind her, the house was alive, filled with laughter and memories. Ahead of her, an open horizon waited to be written. The woman who was once forgotten had finally remembered herself. And that, more than love, was freedom. And you? What did you think of this story? Leave your comment below. And if you enjoy emotional romance stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications to keep following the channel.